Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for part two of our three-part online workshop series for Log 360. For those of you who are just joining in today, my name is Siddharth Sharat Kumar, or just Sid, and I will be your host and presenter for this session. Thank you so much for coming back, those of you who attended yesterday as well. We really appreciate you taking time off to come and engage with us in our online events such as this one. So as always, we will have this recording sent to you in about a week. So don't worry about that. We will send you this recording. All the three parts will be sent to you within a week to 10 days. Also, I want to let you know that I will have a Q&A so you can keep your questions coming on the live chat, and I'll be sure to answer them at the end of the session. Before we get started, as always, can we just make sure everything is okay with the audio and you can see my chat screen as well, I hope. So please use the hand raise option or the chat option to let me know everything is okay. Yep, I already see at least 6 or 7 coming in. Thank you so much for that. So I guess we're all set to get started then for this one. So today, before we start, I want to show you that we are currently doing a weekly IT podcast on various security topics, and we've been running this for about 20 weeks now. So that's 20 podcasts that we've released. Each podcast is about 10 to 12 minutes long and gives you important information about various topics like security information and event management, data protection, hybrid Active Directory management, and so on. So the latest episode that we released was just yesterday, and this episode was done by me in collaboration with Ian Madrigal, better known on the internet as the Monopoly Man. Some of you might have seen Ian as dressed up as the Monopoly Man, going into some of these tech companies, legal cases that happen, and the Monopoly Man is someone who is seen at these events as an activist for data privacy. So we brought the Monopoly Man along for this latest podcast, and I think you should definitely check it out, especially since most of you are joining in from the US or from Europe for this one. You have the GDPR in Europe, and in the US you have various things like the California Consumer Protection Act, which has come out. So we're talking about some of these things in this podcast. I'm just going to quickly send you the link so that you can subscribe to it if you're interested. This is, of course, a weekly thing, so you will be notified on a weekly basis when we release a new episode. And they are all, as you can see, very small. This one, of course, is about 14 minutes long, but we've had various other podcasts on things like privileged attacks in Active Directory, about passwords, about must-have reports, group policy do's and don'ts, topics on SIEM, data security, and so on. So be sure to check this out. This is purely a knowledge share. We don't talk about our solutions, but we try to give you some of the tips, and tricks, and also some industry happenings in some of these domains. So be sure to check it out. That said and done, in today's workshop, we are going to be focusing on alerting, right? So we discussed yesterday why we need a SIEM, and how we bring in data from different sources and generate reports to visualize the information. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at important alerts that every administrator needs, right? So I'm talking about some use cases, give you examples of what kinds of events you need to track and be notified for, show you how we configure an alert profile using our product Log360, talk a little bit about how to maintain the integrity of data. This would be in your sensitive files and folders and your databases. And also, how can you efficiently manage security incidents, right? Once an alert is detected, how do we manage and resolve the incident? So that's what we're going to be looking at in part 2, which is today. And this is a problem that we're trying to solve. right? So if you read many data breach investigations reports, and Verizon is of course publishes this annual report, which is very popular. From many years, they have been saying that data breaches are taking months or longer to discover, right? So even the 2019 report is out. So even in 2019, the statistic is quite similar, that in a majority of the organizations, they are discovering that they have been breached months after the actual attack took place. And that is really alarming, because you see organizations are not in a position to actually detect when something bad happens to their network, right? As the attack happened, as specific security events got triggered in the network, they simply weren't able to detect it and take appropriate action to mitigate the attack at an early stage. So it's not that the organizations lack data. They, of course, have enough information being generated by various systems, applications, network equipment, but they don't have the analytical techniques needed in order to make sense of that data when it's needed the most. Which is to say that if a breach is underway and you have certain events being triggered on the target host or application, organizations are simply not able to detect that as it is happening. And this issue is only going to get more complex. Today, we have much bigger infrastructures. We have the cloud. We have more connected devices. And with all of this only going to increase, and with more attacks getting more sophisticated, this problem of being able to detect an attack is only going to become harder. So that is where, at the most fundamental level, the concept of alerting comes into the picture. And having real-time alerts enabled in your network can be the difference between a safe network and a breached one, right? So this is extremely important, because this is the idea that you get notified when something of interest happens, right? This could be as simple as maybe a user, an unauthorized user, is trying to access sensitive data that they're not supposed to, and you get notified that such an activity is happening in your network. So if you remember the SIEM process that we spoke about yesterday, we are concerned with this red box, which is the alert, right? Yesterday, we talked about how an audit policy is defined and logs are collected. And we looked at the bottom three boxes, right? We looked at how do we now visualize the logs by running reports. We archive them so that we can then conduct a forensic investigation. This would be using the log search in order to backtrack an incident. So that part of it is important, of course. But what we are trying to do now is get alerted then and there when something bad happens. Of course, correlation is an extension of alerts, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But today we're going to focus more on getting this alert and then taking response, right? And then responding to the alert. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples on why we need this kind of alerting. So yesterday we spoke about the example of Ron, an end user in your sales team, being added to domain admins. Now, you can track such changes to group membership by looking at these three event IDs: 4728, 4732, and 4756. So 4728 is for a member being added to a security-enabled global group, 4732 is for a local group, and 4756 is for a universal group. Now, all of these things we want to track, and yes, you can generate reports to view these event IDs, but we want alerts for a specific subset of group membership changes, and we want to focus on our top level groups in Active Directory, right? So these could be administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins, and so on. These are important top level groups that you want to get alerted for when their group membership changes, right? So let me quickly go into AD Audit Plus. When we are saying initially tracking, if you remember yesterday, I quickly showed you these reports that you get in AD Audit Plus. Things like the context of group management, you have a whole bunch of security reports here, right? You have things like you want to look at modified groups. You're able to look at that in a report. You're able to see that, okay, great. These are all the different things that are happening. You have this audit trail, but we also saw that there were a few events here. For example, domain admins, there was a group membership change here, right? This group was modified. Enterprise admins was modified. Schema admins was modified. And for these kinds of events, you need to get notified. You need to get alerted for. So you can see here it says a member was added to a security enabled universal group. Here you have it, of course, a global group, and here you have again a universal group. And these are your top level groups in Active Directory. And people being, obviously you don't want an end user being added to any of these groups. So for a subset of this entire report, you obviously might not be interested in every single change that is happening, but some of these changes, especially for your top level groups, you need to get notified. The rest you can review in a report. So let's look at another example. Consider account lockouts. A lot of you might be struggling with this issue. You have a user calling you and calling the help desk and saying that they've been locked out. You unlock the user, then just moments later, they call you again and say that they've been locked out again. So there might be some underlying issue that is causing the problem, right? You might have, for example, maybe some cache, which is a cache credential, which is causing the lockout because it's authenticating with an old password or something like that. So you need to identify the fact that someone has been locked out, and you need to identify the cause, the root cause of the account lockout. So in this case, again, account lockout would be a subset of your general log-on, log-off events. So you have exhaustive reports for tracking specific kinds of logons in your network, in your Active Directory in this case. And these could be logon successes, failures. You can track it based on specific criteria. You can track local logon, log-offs, and all of this is great. But you may not be concerned about everything that's happening here, right? So you might not be concerned about, for example, in something like an interactive logon failure, you might not be concerned about every single logon failure that's happening, but you may be concerned about a specific subset of this, right? So you, of course, need to track that subset, and you might want to get alerts for some specific kinds of events. So let me show you an example of account lockout, right? I'm just going to search for this report. We have the account lockout analyzer report. This shows me that this user was locked out at a specific time, and it says event ID 4740. You get to see now this user's logon history, so you're able to investigate. This is, of course, you can see, for example, their local logon history, and you can see that, what exactly this user has been doing. You can see, for example, they have some successful logons, the logon type, and all of this typical review that we do. You can also go and see the details of, now in this case, this user has been locked out. So you can go and see the details of the lockout, and you can check various things that cause an account lockout. And this is automatically done, right? You're able to automatically say that, you're able to automatically investigate what were the different causes for an account lockout, and the product can pinpoint that for you. But this is the report, right? So you'll have to come here at some point and check the user's logon history and check the event lockout, the account lockout analyzer details. But you might want an alert for this event, right? If a user gets locked out, you may want an alert for that. And that's what we are trying to achieve, right? We agree that, yes, there is always this thing that you need to be able to investigate, go deep, drill down data, and pull out what you are looking for in a given context. But you need to first be notified to be able to do that, right? So let's look at 7 crucial security events that you need to track. I'm going to go over these one by one. And these you can use as a guiding principle to implement a solution in your organization, right? This is not obviously specific to Log 360. This is something that you can use for ensuring that you're staying on top of some of the common security events of interest. So let's get started with this. The first event is log on, log off events, right? This is a broad category of events. And as we touched upon this yesterday, you want to track log on, log off events because attacks inevitably will have a log on event in their kill chain. So you need to know who is logging on to which system, when, and where. And you need to track both successful logons and failed logons, right? So you need to know this both from the point of view of a system, meaning you need to look at a system and be able to say which are the different users that logged on to that system. And you need to be able to do this from the point of view of the user. You take a user and you need to know which are the systems they logged on to. So you of course want to focus on your critical systems, your important servers, but don't forget your workstations. And the reason I say that is because your workstations are much easier to compromise than a domain controller, right? Your domain controllers have much more tighter policies, and it can be difficult for an attacker to directly compromise that. But your workstations are much more easier for someone to compromise, right? So you need to remember that different kinds of events get logged at the workstation and at the domain controller. So you might be tracking authentication events from your domain controller, and then you need to correlate that with the local log on, log off events on the workstations. But okay, this is in theory that we want to track all of these things, but we need to get an alert for a subset of these events, right? So you want to watch out to begin with for failed logons and account lockouts, right? Set up alerts for repeated failed logons and account lockouts. So if you see a huge number of failed logons happening in your network, you need to be able to get notified immediately, just as you would if someone's account got locked out. For the rest of the logons, yes, you keep tracking them, you maintain the audit trail, you have it in your reports, you have it in your database in case you need to investigate later. But for specific types of events, in this case, repeated failed logons and account lockouts, you want to get an alert for that. The next category is system events, right? System events is basically things that are happening on the system, like a shutdown or a restart, or someone installing something on the machine, like a service or a process or a software. And again, while you want to track this entire broad spectrum of events, you want to specifically focus on certain kinds of system events when it comes to alerting, right? You don't want to get an alert every time someone shuts down a system. But what if the system in concern is a server? And what if it was an unexpected reboot? Or what if it happened, say, 3 times within 10 minutes, right? Those would be the criteria that we're thinking about when it comes to getting an alert. We don't want an alert for every system event, of course not. But how many of you, for example, might install a software on on one of your critical servers, right, regularly? You obviously don't do that. So in such cases where we don't expect something to happen normally, those are the events that we need to focus on and get alerts for, right? So if you don't normally expect something to happen, that's sort of a indicator that something suspicious might be up. So focus on system events. You want to make sure you have reporting and tracking enabled for these broad range of events. But say a specific thing like a service is installed on a server, right? Event ID 4697, you want to get an alert as soon as that happens. Next is data accesses and modifications, right? So these are your files, folders, and databases. Your files and folders, you of course might have sensitive data, and the same with some of your databases that you have, and you need to ensure the integrity of this data. So you have something called file integrity monitoring for files, and you have column integrity monitoring for your databases. So you need to make sure that you are tracking every single access and modification that is being made to your sensitive data. So again, not all accesses and modifications are going to be malicious. It's not that every single person who touches data is doing something malicious, but specific kinds of events, right? Like an unauthorized access or suspicious accesses. What if someone copies a large amount of data or modifies several files, or a file is encrypted? A subset of data accesses and modifications is what you want to get alerts for. So you want to track the 4 vital W's, which is the who, where, when, and what. Who is accessing your data? Where is it being accessed? When was the access made? And in case they make a change, what is the change, right? So you maintain the audit trail for everything, but suddenly you see that, for example, in a school, a student tries to access the question paper that only teachers are supposed to access. That would be a situation where you want to get an alert for, right? I had met this customer while I was in Toronto, and they were looking at implementing this mechanism where they had a student OU and a teacher's OU in their Active Directory, and they made sure they applied restrictions so that students cannot access a specific share which stored some of the question papers for their exams, and only teachers were allowed to access that. So this was what they wanted to do, and what we did with our Manage Engine suite of products was we deployed this tool called AD Manager Plus initially. This is a hybrid Active Directory management tool, and using the tool, we were able to define permissions, categorize members into users, the users into OUs, and then apply the right permissions for those OUs so that the students and teachers could access the things that they actually needed. Then we used the same tool to run a report to validate that the permissions had been properly assigned. So you're able to see that every student does not have access to that specific share and only the teachers do. Then we came to AD Audit Plus and set up a report so that we could maintain the audit trail of every person accessing that share, right? So we are able to see who are all the people accessing the share, and we schedule that report so that we could make sure that only it was the teachers who were accessing the share. Then we went to the alerting section and we set up alerts for when, say, a student, someone from the student OU makes an attempt to access the file. And we did not say one single access. Of course, they will be blocked at this point. So we said if there were, say, 5 continuous access attempts, when it crosses a threshold, you want to get an alert so that maybe that's someone who's trying to get around a system and trying to change some permission and get through. So when we see multiple failed accesses, we want the alert. We also use the tool to set up an alert saying if there is a successful access, right? For some reason, if something has changed and a student successfully accesses the particular file, we want to get an alert for that. Then we also said, let's get alerts for when permissions to that share are changed. So if someone goes and modifies the file permissions, we get alerted for that. So you can see how we implement a system wherein every single event gets tracked, every single event is audited and reported, but a specific set of those events is when we want the alert for, right? So I hope that makes sense. I mean, of course, not all of you must be from the education sector, but the same idea exists, right? You want only specific people accessing sensitive data in your organization. So for that, we have data integrity capabilities within Log 360. AD Audit Plus will look at your Windows, NetApp, and EMC file servers, while Event Log Analyzer will look at your Linux files. Event Log Analyzer will also look at your database applications like SQL, Oracle, and MySQL. So let me show you where that would be in the product. So you have, for example, if you go to AD Audit Plus, you get these reports under the file audit section. Right? I don't have any data populated, but you can see on the left pane, we have different kinds of reports to track specific events, right, at a granular level. What were the files created, modified, deleted, moved, copy, pasted, and so on, right? Even the permission changes and so on. And now in Event Log Analyzer, in AD Audit Plus, you can see this is available for Windows. This is available for Windows file servers, file clusters, NetApp, EMC, and Synology. We support all of that in AD Audit Plus. And in Event Log Analyzer, we do file integrity monitoring for Linux. Right? So if you go to the file monitoring section in Event Log Analyzer, you can see the same kinds of reports for Linux files and folders. So this is an important capability. So make sure that you're leveraging file integrity monitoring, because that is how we ensure that data is not tampered with. And in case someone is trying to mess around with your data, you're tracking that and you're getting notified for that. Next up, web server activity, right? So your web servers are extremely important. Again, you want to track various things that are going on in your web server, who is visiting your site, what are the requests coming in, what are the uploads and downloads, errors, the HTTP status errors. These are all things that you want to track. But specific kinds of attacks, you might want to get notified for, right? So something like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, these are events that happen on your web server, and these are predictable patterns, right? So when such a thing happens, you need to get notified. So make sure you have that kind of tracking. If you look at Event Log Analyzer and you go to the reporting section, you can see these reports in the applications category. You can see reports for IIS, Apache web servers, including your FTP server. And you can see that on the left pane, you get a wide range of reports. You're tracking things like the users, the pages, the queries, the visitors, the status codes, and so on, and some trends. You're tracking errors as well, specific kinds of errors like bad requests, bad gateways, and so on. And then you have this category of reports called attack reports, which are tracking specific kinds of attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, malicious URL requests, and so on. So these are the kind of events for which you want to set up an alert for, right? So it's always a specific subset. You are tracking everything because you need that audit trail to investigate at a later point, but you need also to get alerts for specific kinds of events. So I will show you this in the alerting section. Let's look at one of these examples. So if you go to your alerts section, here you can create what we call an alert profile, which is essentially the criteria for which you want to get an alert notification for. So you can create as many alert profiles as you want. To create an alert profile, you simply give a name, choose the severity of the alert, choose the devices for which you want the alert for, right? So you can choose an entire device group, or you can choose a specific machine. So say you want to choose this machine, you can do that, and then you choose the alerting criteria, right? So in this case, what you can do is you can make use of the wide range of pre-built alert profiles that we have for most of the commonly used systems and applications. So if it's a SQL server, for example, you get access to over 100 pre-built alert profiles, which are essentially alerting criteria, and you can choose what alert you want, right? So it's a broad range, and you, for example, you might look at SQL Server SQL injection. You can choose this, click on save, and that's all there is to configuring the alert, right? You choose the device that you want the alert for, choose the alerting criteria, And then you also have the option of doing a threshold where you can choose the number of events happening within a short period of time, or you can also choose a time range when this alert should be triggered if this event happens during a specific period of time. So you can configure working hours, non-working hours in the settings, and then apply that in your alert profile. Then you choose how you want to be notified. Do you want an email? Do you want an SMS? You can configure your SMS server. Also, it'll prompt you and guide you to do that. You can run a program, or you can execute an entire workflow, which is a chain of actions when this alert is triggered, right? So we essentially give a name for the alert, choose a severity, select the device for which we want the alert for, choose the alerting criteria, and here is where you can make use of the predefined alerts, right? So all of the reports that we have been associated to alert profiles. So you can choose what alert you want. We also have compliance alerts and custom alerting criteria that you can set up. So you choose the alerting criteria. You may want to do a threshold or a time range as part of the advanced configuration. And then you choose the mode of notification, email or SMS, and choose if you want to run a program or execute a workflow when the alert is triggered. We'll get back to this workflow in the end of this session, but what you have to remember is just one idea, which is track all the events and generate your reports, and for a subset of those events, for a few of those events, set up an alert. Right? That is the logic that we are looking at. So the next event is administrator actions. So you want to track administrator actions because things that administrators do can actually end up jeopardizing the security policy of your network, right? If an administrator changes, if an AD administrator changes a GPO, or if a network administrator modifies a firewall policy, or if a database administrator changes the role-based access on your database, all of these things can jeopardize the security policy in your network. So what you have to do is, yes, track all of these different actions. So for example, in the context of your Active Directory, AD Audit Plus will actually give you these details. You get this report that says administrative user actions that shows you at a granular level what are the changes that your administrators are doing to users, computers, groups, OUs, and GPOs. Right? So all of this is tracked. You get a good report which aggregates all of this data. And then you have individual reports for user management, group management, computer OU and GPO management, which give you specific details about, very specific things like creations, deletions, modifications, and so on. Now, you need to get alerts for a subset of these changes, right? So we saw the example in the start, and that's one of my favorite use cases because it's so simple and yet so powerful. We saw the example of a privilege escalation where someone made a change to allow a regular end user into domain admins. So that sort of an event is exactly why we want to get alerts for a specific kind of administrator actions, right? Not all administrator actions might immediately concern you, but specific things like if the administrator is changing a group and the group in concern is one of your top level groups, you want to get an alert for that. But in general, be sure to track administrator actions in your network. The next one is firewall traffic. So firewall traffic is extremely important. Firewall traffic is extremely important. Okay, before that, I've been seeing a few questions that have been coming in. Let me just answer one of them, which was very relevant to this immediate slide. Achim wants to know, can I see the GPO changes or only the action of a change? Very good question, right, from Achim, because Achim is essentially saying, why just know that a GPO has changed? Shouldn't I be able to tell what the change was? And for that, you get these in-depth details in the GPO changes report, right? So you have reports like recently modified GPOs, which give you that high-level view of what were the GPOs modified. So you're essentially tracking more here, who is making the change, where is it happening, important things like what was the event type and so on. And you also, of course, can look at some more parameters in the report, but you can then go to GPO history. Let me just wait for this to load. And here you can see even more details on the old value and the new value. Right? So I hope this was your question, Archem, that am I able to also track what the changes were? And to that, the answer is absolutely yes. We are fully cognizant of the importance of knowing what the changes. That's why we talk about the who, when, which, and what. Right? The what refers to the actual change made to your GPO. And here you can see the old value and the new value. Right? So you can look at these things. Let me just wait for this to load. So you can look at the old permission, and you can look at the new ACF, right? So this is being tracked at a proper level, and it's also able to show what the changes are. It's not just about knowing about the change, right? But of course, here is where we say, that yeah, we are maintaining this audit trail of all of these different changes and all of these different activities, and you can drill down and navigate through these reports and pull out the relevant information. But when the GPO change happens, you need that alert notification, right? So that's where this becomes extremely important. The concept of alerting is to give you that alarm that, hey, something is up, someone changed the GPO. Then you go to the reports, you then go to the search, and then you investigate, see what the change was, who made the change, when did it happen, what was the old and new value, right? So that is about, thank you so much for that question, because I think that really reiterates why we need to have the alert and then be able to go and get those important details, in this case, the changed value of the GPO. So the next event is firewall traffic, right? Firewall traffic is extremely important to track, because most attacks involve firewall activity, right? Especially attacks coming from the outside would involve a period of events happening on the firewall. So your firewall is tracking what is being allowed into your network, what is being denied, and it's going to be looking at important details of the source and destination, right, of the traffic. So you need to track that. You need to see what is the source from which traffic is coming from, what is the destination to which traffic is going to, what is the port, what are the ports being used, what are the protocols being used, and you maintain this list of audit events, maintain the audit trail, because this is what you will turn to in an investigation. But you want to get alerts again for specific kinds of events involving your firewalls, right? So that you can detect an attack at an early stage. So for example, let me go to event log analyzer for this one. For example, if you go to event log analyzer, under the reports, under the devices section in the reports, you can see multiple categories of devices for which we have reports for. So these could be, and we do vendor specific reports, right? It's not general reports for any network device, but it's specific reports for specific vendors like Cisco or SonicWall, Juniper, and so on. So we give reports for each of these vendors that you see over here and more over here. And what this means is, for example, if you click on Fortinet, you can actually get specific reports about firewall allowed traffic, denied connections, the logon activities, IDS IPS events, specific reports for VPN logons, and so on, right? So again, we are trying to track things at a granular level. We want to give you specific information. You might want to see what is the top traffic based on the protocol, for example, and you can see that in terms of what are the protocols being used um, in the uh, in your network communications, right? So you can see that right here. So you can see what is the count for each of these transmission protocols. You can see the traffic based on the ports as well. What are the ports being used? So you can see that in this case, you have port 80. You can see the traffic based on the source, which means where is the traffic coming from. So you see most of the traffic coming in from these IP addresses. You can see it based on the destination. Now, all of this is great, but what if, for example, you have repeated denied connections from the same source? You might want to be monitoring such an event, right? Because that is, you don't want every time a firewall blocks something, you don't want an alert. But if a specific IP address for an entire hour keeps trying to access something but keeps getting blocked, right, multiple times, you may want to get notified for that. And another example would be, what if someone changes a firewall policy, right? So that same IP address that was being denied access to your network, maybe someone goes and changes a firewall policy, and then because of that firewall policy change, they are now able to gain access and maybe execute something malicious on one of your web servers. So you need to track firewall policy changes, which is a subset of firewall events. Make sure if someone changes your firewall policy, you are immediately notified so that you can go see if that was a expected authorized change or whether someone did it with malicious intent or unknowingly. So again, the concept remains the same. We are extremely dependent on our logs. Our logs help us audit important things and stay on top of various kinds of events. But specific kinds of those events, we want to trigger alerts for. That brings me to my final event, which is changes made to the logging policy. So by now you know how important your logs are, and you know how important your logs are going to be for security investigations. So unfortunately, attackers know that as well. So what attackers try to do often when they try to create an attack is they try to shut down the logging policy or temporarily pause the logging in your network. Because they know that if they pause the logging and carry out an attack, maybe they go and access something or change something in Active Directory. And if you don't have the audit trail, what are you going to do? So attackers are constantly looking at ways by which they can modify the logging policy. But the good news is that when someone changes a logging policy, that final event will get recorded, which means you can detect it, right? Even if they go and do something after the logging policy, which is not immediately tracked, but the fact that they have changed the logging policy is something that is a good start for you to know that something suspicious is up in your network. So such events, such as someone deleting or modifying or changing the logging policy, is what we call an indicator of compromise, right? An indicator of compromise, or IOC, as the name indicates, is basically an event that could indicate that something might be going wrong in your network. So make sure you track that. Also make sure, on a related note, to track attempts to access or tamper audit logs. What this means is the logs that you've stored in your archives. If someone is trying to access it and modify it, you want to be alerted for that as well. So keep this in mind. These are all important events. And what you can take away from these 7 events is, yes, you need to track, in this case, yeah, if a single logging policy is changed, you want an alert. But what you want to remember is, in the previous cases, in firewall traffic, for example, we're tracking many things, but our indicators of compromise are things like multiple denied connections or a firewall policy being changed. With administrator actions, again, we're tracking everything, we are generating reports, we are reviewing these events, but our indicators of compromise are going to be things like privilege escalations. Web server activity, again, our indicators of compromise are going to be things like cross-site scripting or SQL injections. Same with data accesses and modifications. We have our file integrity monitoring reports coming in. We're tracking the 4 vital Ws, but we are more concerned for our indicators of compromise, which could be things like an encryption, multiple failed access attempts, multiple files being copied or deleted, and so on. Again, when it comes to system events, we are tracking everything, but we are specifically concerned about certain kinds of installations of processes or services or unexpected shutdowns and restarts. And again, with logon activity, we are tracking many things, but we are finally concerned about things like account lockouts, multiple failed logons, and so on. So now you know what an indicator of compromise is. When you configure these alert profiles in the solution, you want to configure alerts for as many indicators of compromises as possible, and you want to make sure that you are covered on as many grounds as possible, because the idea is to maximize the chance of detecting an attack. There's obviously no sure shot way of doing this, except that track more things, as many things as possible, right? Because what we saw in the start was something that it takes several months, right? 5 or 6 months for an attack to be detected. So if you have more alerts set up for your various indicators of compromise, the odds of you detecting an attack at an early stage is something that can greatly be improved. Okay, so the last part of this presentation is on streamlining incident management. So once you've got an alert, you obviously need to resolve it, right? So the key performance indicator for a security operations team must be the time it takes to detect and respond to an incident. So you can reduce the time it takes to detect an incident by having multiple alerts set up so that you are able to detect it at an early stage. But once you detect it, you need to make sure there isn't any lag in the response. So response means that some administrator comes into the scene, goes and investigates what's happened. It could be as simple as the example of a GPO change. You come into the scene, you see that a GPO has been changed, you go see who did the change, when did this happen, you check if it was authorized, you see the old and new values, so you complete that investigation, and if you see that it was an accidental change or for whatever reason it was changed incorrectly, you can then revert, right? You can then revert the change by seeing the old and new value, and you go back to the normal configuration. So that part of coming onto the scene and doing all of this is responding to the incident. So you have to make sure the time it takes to respond is as less as possible. So for that, there are a couple of things you can do. One is you need to implement a solid process in your security team to ensure that alerts are being attended to by your administrators and are being resolved, right? So you want to make sure that as alerts are triggered, some administrator is looking into it, so you have a process in place that assigns alerts to specific administrators and monitor if they are reviewing it and responding to the incidents and closing these tickets on time. So so that ensures swift resolution of the alert, because now you have a process in place where if an alert came on your SQL server, it gets immediately pushed in real time or near real time to your database administrator. So in addition to that, you can also automate the action, right? You can also automate the response, because you can say that why should the administrator do something that is predictable when the system can automatically do that for them? So if you have an attack like ransomware, the first thing that you're going to do is take the system that is infected off the network, right? Shut it down and take it off the network so that the ransomware doesn't spread across the network. So in such a case, if you see a ransomware encryption, why not automate the response so that by the time an administrator comes in on the scene, that first level of response is already taken. So the administrator gets an alert, the administrator sees that something has happened, and then the administrator comes in on the scene to know that, okay, this level of action has already been taken, and they can move on to the next steps. So that can greatly reduce the time it takes for them to complete their response and resolve the incident. So let's quickly see how that would look like in Event Log Analyzer. So in Event Log Analyzer, if you go to the alert section of the solution, you can manage all of the alerts from within the console. So you get to see all of the different alerts that have been triggered right here. And you can choose a specific alert and assign it to one of your administrators. So you can assign it to a specific admin, you can leave some notes for them, and the administrator will have the option to close or mark the status as in progress. So that is one thing that you can do, and this allows you to see, okay, how many open incidents are there, what are the incidents, and so on. Next is integrating your tool with a help desk tool. So you may have a centralized help desk tool like Manage Engine's own Service Desk Plus or some of the other vendors. So you can integrate our tool with one of these vendors who have help desks so that every alert can be pushed as a ticket on the help desk tool, right? So to automate some of these things, you can assign rules. These are alert assignment rules where you can say that alerts for a specific device or a device group have to be pushed to a specific administrator. So you can say that if you have an alert on any of the Unix devices that you have, that has to get assigned to your Linux administrator, right? So you can create this process. So as alerts are triggered, they get pushed to the respective people, as tickets, or it's basically there in that person's name so that you have an accountable process of resolving the incident. So you can also, like I said, create workflows, right? Workflows are various actions that you can take automatically when the alert is triggered. It can just be one single event. It can be one single event like, killing a process, or it can be a chain of events. Wait, let me just reload that. Right, so it could be individual events like this. It could be like a blocking the USB, disabling the computer, and you can create these kind of workflows. It could be multiple events like logging off and then disabling a user. These are things that you can do. You can create these workflows by choosing from our wide range of pre-built actions, and you can combine these actions with logical operators and create a workflow. Once you save the workflow, you can go back to the alert profile section. Let me just reload that again. And you'll have the option of enabling the workflow while creating the alert profile, right? So here, while you're creating the alert profile, you have the option of enabling the workflow and choosing the workflow right here, and also assigning this alert to someone. So you would have created an alerting criteria. You say that if this alert is triggered, it needs to go to a specific administrator. And you say that so that when the administrator comes in, by that time, the system has already taken some level of response, like killing the process or disabling a user or USB and things like that. Right? So remember that we are looking at how can we reduce the time it takes to detect, but don't forget how do we efficiently manage and respond to the alert once we detect a security incident. So that brings me to the end of part 2. in part 3, which is tomorrow, we will be looking at event correlation. So that is a way by which we can associate multiple alarms and track more complex attack patterns. So we're going to look at event correlation, how does that work, and some use cases around that, and look at some of the more advanced features like threat intelligence and user and entity behavior analytics, right? So these are more advanced features. So far, we looked at, say, tracking a specific event, right? Like if a GPO changes or if an account gets locked out and things, or if there is SQL injection. But tomorrow, we're going to look at more advanced ways by which we can detect attacks at an early stage. So we'll talk about threat intelligence and UEBA as well. Now, before I start answering your questions, I want to give, for those of you who didn't attend our session yesterday, we were giving this free license for our threat intelligence and UEBA add-on free for 90 days until the 1st of July. So I'm going to send this on the live chat and you can access this. Let me just type this out. Get your free add-on licenses. So I'm just sending out a link for all of you to access. Those of you who are interested can avail this. Just simply give your name and email ID and we'll send across this add-on license for you. It would be great if you can even send it today. And in case you're able to, of course, it's quite tight to expect it by that you can use it by tomorrow, but we'll try to send it immediately. So you can even try to install it, because tomorrow we're going to talk about these things, right? UEBA and threat intelligence. So if you're already using Log 360 and you have these free add-ons for now incorporated, you'll be able to appreciate these features even more in tomorrow's session. It's okay if you don't as well. Obviously, it'll still be beneficial, the cases that I discuss. But you can definitely check it out if you're interested, and we'll try to send the complimentary license across. Okay, so finally the questions. Let me start taking some of the questions that have come. I have quite a few questions, but I'll answer maybe 2 or 3 out loud, and then the rest of it we'll take up on the live chat. So I see a lot of questions on things like whether we will be sending the recording. So yes, we will be sending that. Don't worry about it. You should get it in a week. I have displayed my email ID on this slide, so you can definitely make note of that and reach out to me if you want to engage in a one-on-one discussion to resolve an issue, or maybe you want to explore another part of Log 360. Please do make a note of my email and reach out to me. So let me start taking a few of the questions, right? So I see one here. Here I have a question from Peter Brown. Thank you for asking, Peter. Peter wants to know. He says we own AD Audit Plus already, but it's not licensed for all servers and workstations. And Peter wants to know how the licensing works and if they should buy the license for AD Audit or for Log 360. Well, so the licensing depends. Each source is either part of Event Log Analyzer or part of part of AD Audit Plus. So what that means is, if you're looking at your domain controllers, they will be licensed in your in AD Audit Plus. The only tricky part is if you have Windows servers, in which case the Windows security log that your member servers get licensed in AD Audit Plus, and you have other parts in your event log which will be licensed as part of Event Log Analyzer. I know it sounds a little bit tricky and confusing, but the best way for you to check out the licensing would be to think of it as a Log 360 license. Let me just go to Log 360's website and show you where that would be. You can just go to Get Quote, and over here you can simply choose. So don't view this as, is it part of AD Audit Plus or Event Log Analyzer when it comes to your licensing. Simply go here and choose how many domain controllers you have, how many Windows servers, how many workstations, and so on, and choose, what are the different add-ons that you might want. Because only for Windows, it's a little tricky because we have separate kinds of reports in AD Audit Plus and Event Log Analyzer. But we will be able to work out with you, depending on exactly what kinds of use cases you're trying to solve, exactly what license you should purchase. So anyone who has licensing questions, you can email me, and I'll help you sort out exactly what you want. And as far as for whether the licensing is perpetual or subscription, we have both the models. So again, depending on your requirements, we can tweak the licensing so that you are getting charged only for what you want. So you might not want specific reports, or you might not want specific devices or specific capabilities. So the licensing is quite robust in making sure that you pay for only what you want, and you have the flexibility of choosing an annual subscription or a perpetual license. So the next one more question is again from Achim, who wants to know, if I add a Windows file server to get a file audit report, is it possible to enable only a few folders which should be watched? I will not track the complete file server. Absolutely, that can absolutely be done. So while you configure the file integrity monitoring, you can choose which files and folders you want to audit, right? So you can do it at two levels. One is you can do it when you configure the audit policies, and when you are defining these all your SACLs on the file and folder, you can choose for which events audit events need to get generated. Then you can bring that specific data into the tool, and the tool will process that for you. And you have the option of creating templates so that you can choose which files and folders you want to actually monitor and which needs to be ignored. And you can also choose, then of course, when it comes to alerts, you choose a specific kind of actions that you want to get alerts for. So you have these file integrity monitoring templates that you can set up. This would be fairly straightforward. So if you need any assistance, just drop me an email. We can help you configure these things. So you can choose like these templates, and you can choose what are the locations you want to monitor, what to exclude. That would be fairly straightforward. So we can definitely help you with that. Do drop in an email if you want personal assistance on setting these up. But yeah, this is a very important thing that you're asking, because obviously you don't want to track every file and folder, right? You might not be interested in tracking everything. So we will, instead of tracking the complete server, we will focus on only specific files, folders, and shares. That can absolutely be done. Have another question from Thierry. Thierry wants to know, can we do ticketing tool integration with SolarWinds ticketing tool? I don't think we support that. Let me just quickly recheck. In the event log analyzer alerting console, we support about 5 or 6 different vendors. Let me just check. We do Service Desk Plus, Jira, Zendesk, ServiceNow, Kayako. I'm afraid we don't support SolarWinds at this point, but it's not very hard for us to add this, right? We can do this for you. If most of these integrations have come as a result of people asking us to do this because they have that specific vendor, and we go ahead and build it as a feature for the entire product, right? That is how we function as a product company. As we get feature requests, we take them up and we build them, and it's released for anyone who wants to use that integration. So Thierry, we thank you for bringing this up. We will definitely pass this on to the product development team, and I can keep you posted on when we bring this out. So if you're interested, just drop me an email. I can formally take it up as a feature request. Drop an email to the ID that you see on the screen, and we can see how soon we can bring out, because these integrations are not very hard for us to build in. We build in a lot of integrations every, we keep releasing them every month, support for more devices, because we're today talking of the situation where more tools in IT are getting integrated, and we definitely want to bring these kind of features if we see more people wanting specific integrations. So please do drop me an email and we can take this forward. So I see a few more questions, but they seem more specific to people and their environment. So I'm going to take those up on the live chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Do stick around for 2 or 3 minutes in case your question hasn't been answered, and you'll receive the reply on the live chat. Apart from that, thank you once again for joining us today. And I hope to see you all same time tomorrow for the third and final part of the workshop series. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day ahead.